When civilization meant losing your rights, pre-colonial Filipino women, Spanish colonizers arrived in the Philippines with a mission to civilize the natives, especially the women. But here's what they don't tell you in history class. Pre-colonial Filipino women could own property, divorce their husbands, lead armies, and rule kingdoms. Spanish women couldn't do any of that. So who exactly was civilizing who? This is the story of what Filipino women lost when they were saved. The women Spain found. When the Spanish arrived in the 1500s, they were shocked by what they saw. Filipino women weren't locked away in homes. They weren't property. They walked freely, conducted trade, and spoke directly to men without permission. Spanish friar Francisco Colin wrote with obvious discomfort, "The women are not reared in retirement. They go wherever they wish by day or night." Another friar noted that women managed all the finances and that husbands dared not object. This wasn't what Spanish men expected from a primitive society. In Spain, women couldn't own property separately from their husbands. They couldn't conduct business without male permission. They certainly couldn't divorce. Yet here in the Philippines, women were doing all of this and more. Property and economic power. In pre-colonial Philippines, women inherited equally with men. Sometimes they inherited more, especially the eldest daughter. They owned land, boats, slaves, and gold independently. When they married, their property remained theirs, not their husbands'. Spanish records describe women as the primary merchants and traders. They controlled the markets. They negotiated prices. They managed household wealth. One friar complained that Filipino men were lazy because they let their wives handle business. He didn't understand that this was the system. Women were the economic backbone. Compare this to Spain. A Spanish woman's property automatically became her husband's upon marriage. She couldn't make contracts, couldn't buy or sell without his consent. Her earnings belonged to him. Legally, she was more similar to a child than an adult. The Babaylan, spiritual and political power. But economic power was just the beginning. The most powerful religious figures in pre-colonial Philippines were the Babaylan, and most of them were women. Babaylans were priestesses, healers, and spiritual advisors. They communed with spirits, performed rituals, blessed harvests, and healed the sick. But their power wasn't just spiritual, it was political. Dadas and Rajas consulted Babaylans before making major decisions. No war was declared, no treaty signed, no leader chosen without their blessing. Some Babaylans were also warriors. Spanish accounts describe women fighters who led men into battle, their bodies covered in spiritual tattoos believed to grant invincibility. These weren't exceptions. They were part of the social fabric. In one documented case, a Babaylan named Tamblot led a religious uprising against the Spanish in Bohol in 1621. A woman leading an armed rebellion against colonial forces. Can you imagine a female priest leading a military revolt in 1600 Spain? It would be unthinkable. Women couldn't even enter the priesthood. Female datas and leaders pre-colonial Philippines had female datas, chieftains who ruled territories, commanded warriors, and made laws. This wasn't symbolic power. This was real governance. Spanish records mention Princess Orduja, a legendary warrior princess who supposedly ruled a kingdom and fought off foreign invaders. Whether she existed or not, the fact that Filipinos told these stories shows that female leadership wasn't considered impossible or unusual. When the Spanish arrived, they encountered female leaders who negotiated treaties, commanded tribute, and controlled trade routes. The colonizers didn't know what to do with them. Spanish law had no framework for women with political authority. Marriage and divorce. Here's where it gets really interesting. Pre-colonial Filipino women could divorce their husbands easily. Reasons for divorce included adultery, abuse, incompatibility, or simply not wanting to be married anymore. The woman took her property, her dowry, and often the children. Done. The Spanish were horrified. One friar wrote, "They separate for the slightest cause, and the woman is free to marry again immediately." He saw this as moral degradation. But think about what this actually meant. Women had autonomy over their own lives. In Spain, divorce didn't exist. Marriage was a sacrament for life. A woman could be beaten, cheated on, abandoned. Didn't matter. She stayed married. The Catholic Church forbade divorce. Even annulments were nearly impossible and required wealth and connections. Filipino women had more marital freedom in the 1400s than Spanish women had in the 1900s. Let that sink in. What the Spanish changed. Then colonization happened, and systematically, deliberately, these rights disappeared. The Spanish implemented their legal code. Women became legal minors under their husbands. Property transferred to men upon marriage. Divorce became illegal. Women couldn't testify in court with the same weight as men. The Catholic Church targeted the Babaylans specifically. They were labeled witches, heretics, devil worshippers. Many were executed. Others were forced to convert and forbidden from performing rituals. The spiritual and political power of women was rebranded as evil. Spanish education taught Filipino girls to be modest, obedient, and submissive, qualities that pre-colonial Filipino women would have found bizarre. Convents and schools for girls focused on needlework, prayer, and domestic skills, not trade, not leadership, not property management. Within a few generations, the memory of what women once were began to fade. The tragic irony. Here's the part that should make you angry. The Spanish justified colonization as a civilizing mission. They were bringing culture, religion, and proper gender roles to savages. But pre-colonial Filipino women had rights that European women were fighting for and wouldn't achieve for another 300 years. Spanish women didn't get property rights equal to men until the late 1800s. They didn't get divorce until 1981. 1981. Meanwhile, Filipino women had these rights in 1400 and lost them when civilization arrived. What survived, not everything disappeared. Even today, remnants of that ancient power remain. The Philippines was the first Asian country to have a female president, Corazon Aquino, in 1986. Then another, Gloria Macapagal Arroyo. Women remained dominant in Philippine business and finance. Matriarchal tendencies still exist in Filipino families, where mothers often control household finances. Some scholars argue that Filipinas recovered their status faster than other colonized women, precisely because the memory of equality was culturally embedded. It wasn't a foreign concept imported from the West. It was a return to something ancient. But let's be clear. Modern Filipino women still face machismo, domestic violence, and inequality. The Philippines ranks high on gender equality indices, but that doesn't mean the fight is over. It means the fight is old, older than colonization itself. The bottom line, Spanish colonizers looked at Filipino women and saw chaos. Women who spoke freely, owned property, divorced at will, led armies, and communed with gods. They saw this as evidence of a society that needed correction. But what they actually saw was freedom. and they destroyed it in the name of saving souls. The next time someone talks about how colonization brought civilization to the Philippines, ask them this: what kind of civilization takes rights away from women? What kind of progress moves backward? Pre-colonial Filipino women weren't perfect. Their society had slavery, class hierarchies, and problems we'd find unacceptable today. But in the specific question of women's rights, they were centuries ahead of their colonizers. They told Filipino women they needed to be civilized. What they meant was they needed to be controlled. The tragedy isn't just what was lost, it's that we were taught to be grateful for losing it, to see colonization as progress, not regression. But history doesn't lie. The records are there, written by Spanish friars who were shocked, confused, and threatened by what they found. Women who didn't need permission, women who didn't need saving. Maybe the real savages were the ones who thought freedom was barbaric.